Hey, everybody, welcome back to Quality Coffee Break. In this episode, we're going to talk about how keeping it simple can improve your overall quality program. Right, Amy? Sometimes we call it keep it simple, stupid.
Lovingly so, lovingly so. Keep it simple, stupid, or kiss. Yes,
If we're feeling a bit cheeky.
indeed. Yes, yes. And it's an important message, isn't it? Because sometimes people can just overcomplicate things to the nth degree in terms of writing an overly complex SOP, design inputs, CAPAs, audits, which might just go kind of completely away. So yeah, I keep it simple, stupid. Core beliefs as quality managers that you need to get to the point. We need to be clear in terms of what we're talking about.
Agreed. And it's not necessarily writing or performing to the lowest common denominator. I would say
Mhm.
it's more about editing appropriately so we're covering exactly what we need to cover. Right. So let's talk a little bit about how you might do this in an SOP or in that kind
Mm.
of a document. So, what are the ways, or how have you implemented the philosophy as you write or revise or review SOPs?
All right, let's go for it. So before I said I've got a little catchphrase at work, which was like, "What's the risk?" I'm going to use another little catchphrase I have. Is just like, tell me the story. Like, what is the story behind, we're talking about here? So this is really where like that purpose of the document, which most SOPs kind of start with. So why has this document been created in the first place? Has it been created to, for example, cover section 4.1? Some elements of the standard, or maybe other regulations, so we can really get an idea of what, why it's there in the first place. And then sort of moving on to like the scope of the document. So what is actually going to be included within the SSOP, within this work instruction? Are there actually things in there which you're not going to go into so much detail about and actually have referred to elsewhere? Because I think, as well as stating clearly what the document is about and, the scope, what is actually excluded and where people should look for that as well. Because, it can be so easy to put everything, like absolutely everything into an SOP or a work instruction when actually people might find it easier to have like take a sort of bite-sized approach. I mean, what do you think, Susie?
Yeah, I agree with the bite-sized approach. And also, I think it helps prevent errors down the road because
Mm,
when you have it's a very natural instinct, I think, to want to describe a process from start to finish and all the subparts that go along with it.
mm,
But if you have those subparts broken out into their own work instruction, you're going to just shoot yourself in the foot if you try and repeat that information or reiterate the information. It's always smarter to refer in your document to the other document.
mm.
So, because as things change and evolve over time, then you have two documents that you would have to keep up to date as opposed to just the one. And you're going to screw that up at some point. And then you're going to have a car, and then your root cause will be, well, we made this too complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there was it's a really common error that some people like make the first time they write like SOPs, work instructions, referring to revision numbers, version numbers. Oh my gosh. I mean, if you do that like from the get-go, you're just gonna, you're gonna update one document and end up having to update your entire QMS. Because
Yes. And the big one for me when you see that is in like references to ISO standards, right? We don't need it to say the year, ISO 13485 2016, or you know there will be the risk management one, and then it's going to get revised, and so then all those places where it said 2019, you're going to have to change that to 2025 or whenever they update it. And
Mhm.
it's so easy to just get those, to lose those, and it's a needless specificity, because if your quality manual states that these are the standards that we are going to work towards and be compliant with, the current version of the following standards is all
Mhm.
you need. And then
Absolutely.
you have to have a program already to keep those standards up to date and how you're incorporating them into your QMS as they do change.
Mm.
So you have to have that covered. You don't need that specificity in every SOP or design document.
No, agreed. Because I mean, this is where regulatory intelligence, regulatory affairs sort of comes in my opinion, because that whole process. I mean, some organisations have a whole function devoted to regulatory intelligence, which I think is pretty cool, just to be reading up on standards all the time. But defining your external documents, so documents originating from outside of your organisation, such as regulation standards, which your QMS uses. So defining how you're controlling those. So if you're using, I'm not going to name an example, but we all know that there are programs out there that can help you manage your external documents. So if you just kind of refer to that to say, these are the documents that you're using. And then when it comes to things like, regulatory submissions and stuff, you know that you're going to be reproducing that list anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I agree. Keeping it simple in the fact of just, make sure there's a centralized location for your standards that you're using within your QMS, so you don't have to keep updating everything when those standards are inevitably revised.
Yes. Yes. So I think that's the big thing for me for SOPs is just
Mm.
keeping it limited and edited to precisely what you need to cover in that document. Now, what do you think about CAPAs?
Mm.
How would you keep those simple, or how do you apply the principle?
I think it's always just coming back to the reason why that kappa was originated in the first place. What was the reason? Are we looking at a corrective action, preventative action? What were the processes that led to its detection? And just kind of just not straying from that too much. Um, Taking that risk-based approach. We spoke about this in the last episode, so I'm not going to get too too much all into that again. But making sure that what you're looking at, you're not going too far out. Making sure you've got a good root cause analysis process, following that through, clear corrective actions or preventative actions which will address the main problem, and then obviously the verification of effectiveness, which is different from implementation of your corrective actions. So just remember that little bypass from our last one. But yeah, I mean, in terms of that, it's just always just kind of just coming back to why it originated in the first place. So the origin of that Kappa story, if you let me that one.
I agree. I
Mm.
think we've seen it. I think many of us have probably seen this in the past where you you have not a small issue or not an insignificant issue, and your corrective actions and your preventive actions that you develop are probably tiered, right? And you have the things that we're going to handle the issue right away, your corrections, and then you're going to have your corrective actions. Um, but sometimes we take that a little bit too far, and we say, "Oh, we need a whole new process for managing change because we failed to identify something during a change control." And you're like, "Okay, well that's maybe a bit too far."
A bit OTT.
A bit OTT. So not to say that maybe the change control process couldn't use improvement, maybe it could, but you can do that outside of that particular kappa. In the kappa, solve the issue that went wrong and leave it there.
And then moving on from Kappas into audits. I mean, what do you think about keeping your audits very streamlined? How could we take the KISS approach to audits?
I think it's firstly really important to keep the scope identified and keep the
Mm-hmm.
scope appropriate. I think
Mm-hmm.
audits and those of us who are auditors have all experienced the scope creep where and not to say that you don't pull on a thread if you detect an issue and you need to see how far that goes or how deep that goes, but if you're focused on the manufacturing process, then stay focused on the manufacturing process, and you don't necessarily need to bleed into the supply chain process or bleed
Mm-hmm.
into the distribution process or some of these other elements. Like they probably have their own audits, or they should have their own audits on the schedule. So if you can keep it focused, um, I think that will go a long way. And also remember that you're in charge of your own audit program. So you can identify an audit that is a really narrowly focused audit if that's what's appropriate. If you're using your risk-based approaches to evaluation and creating your audit schedule, you don't even have to look at all of manufacturing. You can say, let me look at this particular line or this particular product or what have you, and limit your audits so that they can be done in a timely manner, they can be effective, and they have a clear start and finish.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, your the internal audit schedule is so fundamental to helping with that KISS approach, isn't it? Making sure, as you've said, like, you're looking at, certain things within the process. I was just thinking as you were talking about, supplier audits as well, because they can sometimes be quite tricky things to plan. Everybody will usually have will hopefully have a routine supplier audit schedule. So, for the first time that you go and see a supplier, you might want to give it the whole works, right? So you might want to, review the whole QMS. But then when you're kind of getting into sort of more of surveillance, you can sort of take the same approach, can't you? So maybe, look at the quality manual, maybe just kind of skim over, maybe the, documentation control. But if you've had some issues with the supplier, potentially, maybe you want to spend a bit more time, in those areas. So making sure that you're appropriately planning your, your audit, for your supplier audit, to make sure that you are focusing.
It's so important in supplier audits because you often have one day.
Oh,
Yeah,
so hard.
you have one day, maybe just one auditor, probably one auditor,
Hmm.
and you have a lot to assess. So it really makes sense to target based on risk and really dig into. I mean, you're not going to be able to dig in and have a really holistic audit, but focus definitely on the areas that you've been concerned with. That's where you say, I need to see an example of the thing that you manufactured for us and look at these complaints or what have you, and just really focus on that time so it can be as effective as possible, a good use of your time.
Absolutely. I'll also just add to that, you might be a bit jet lagged if you are auditing suppliers that quite far away from you. So making sure that you've got your audit plan and your audit checklist very sort of specific is just going to help you, because I think no amount of, need a good amount of coffee, but also, a good amount of your audit plan to help you along with that. Um, yeah, so thinking about going back to sort of documents and sort of more routine sort of quality documents and document control. Have you ever had experience where it feels like everybody is approving a document?
Yes.
Oh,
I mean, and I would say especially early stage organizations and maybe some of those early documents, like
yeah.
every single person is on there. And maybe that's necessary when you're talking about those really first documents or those super critical ones. But no, yeah, you don't need that. You need to make sure that it's the appropriate approvers, and whether that should be your subject matter experts for that particular task or that particular process that you're is it the subject of the SOP. You have to have QA. That's all you need.
Yeah, right.
I mean, somebody who has and also the approval process is not the time to collaborate, right? You should be doing all of your collaboration with other stakeholders in the process offline. You're in your document development process. If it's a process that deals with maybe two or three different departments, you should have gotten their input and collaborated prior to the approval step. So
Hmm.
you shouldn't need them. You shouldn't need God and everybody on that document.
Oh God, no. So where, having defined responsibilities, authorities, who's ultimately accountable for, processes within the company. I think Harping back to our first podcast where we were talking about, you're a new quality manager and you're setting up your processes and stuff. Those responsibilities. Who is ultimately responsible for those department areas, and who's the subject matter expert, because that is really going to help you define who should be approving what document within your QMS.
And also, I think it's important to set the right like responsibility level, so not only just at the department but at the staffing level as well, right? Are there documents where your team leads can be the approvers, or are there documents where it needs to be the department manager? Does it have to be a director or a vice president level or a C-suite level? All right, like making sure that you think about that appropriately will help you as well.
Yeah, I
You
did. Sorry. I mean, I did do an audit for a company, and I have to admit, I was really impressed with the way that they demonstrated all like the different levels, because they essentially categorized all of their different documentation, and then against it, that it's a lovely little matrix to say, well, you need this level for this, and then this level for
Mhm.
this. So I thought that was a really handy way of doing it. So I won't say who it was, but yeah, that audit was particularly nice in the document control aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I've done that and seen that in other organizations as well. And I think it makes sense because you also need to prioritize the time for your executives in particular, right? If you can't have the CEO sign all the documents, it's not necessary. But should the CEO sign like the primary policies? Maybe that makes sense for your organization. Or maybe not, or maybe you get that down to that vice president level or to a director level. Just make sure that it works for you and for your organization. But that's another way that you can keep things as simple as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a very sort of similar process that goes on with document control, hand in hand. Training.
Training,
Training! Woohoo!
everyone's favorite.
Yeah, everyone loves training. Auditors especially, because there's usually a finding in training, isn't there? But yeah, so in terms of training, I've certainly had experiences where I had to read documents that were talking about systems or like computer systems that I would never use. I do recall having to read, how like this complex computer system, worked. And I was like, why? And I've now got a sign that I read and understood it. Why? Like, I mean, firstly, I don't think I do. I don't think I do understand what this procedure is actually telling me. And two, do I need to sign this off? So, really thinking about who needs to be trained in what process is so important, because if you get the whole blooming company to be trained in your whole QMS, I don't think they are going to be trained. And actually, the important procedures and processes that they do need to be trained in, they're probably not going to be trained very well in those processes either. So keeping it simple by making sure that according to the person's job description, what processes that they need to be trained in.
Agreed. Can't agree more. It's training is one of those things that can easily run away with you. And if you don't sort of control that process early on, it can become this very overwhelming monster.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so being really intentional and thoughtful as you're
Hmm.
setting this up so that you're looking, again, look to the future. I always try and think about what can I do now that's going to help me in the future when maybe we're three times the size we are now, or we've got another 10 different products or whatever it might be. um, Set those processes in place so you can limit them. I wouldn't set it up so that each person has a very unique training plan. I'd
Hmm.
say, keep your set yourself up for success by creating roles or creating templates, right? So like people in this category or people in this department or people in this job who have this job title, all get trained on the same things. It's a different way of keeping it simple. It's keeping it simple for the administration of the training program. But of course, you've got to strike that right balance. Make sure that people aren't being trained on the entire QMS when they don't need it, um, and making sure that people are trained on exactly what they need to be trained on, and similarly to other people in that same role, so that it's easier for your managers, it's easier for your administration of the training program, and you're setting yourself up for future expansion or development by just slotting in a new role or a new training profile, whatever you might
Yeah.
call it.
I mean, it's easier to manage that way, isn't it? Like, I completely agree with you. Completely, 100%. Good insight. As always, Susie, I'll just quickly add.
Pro tip.
Pro tips. Yeah, I think also like the risk-based approach can help with all of the above, can't it? I think that maybe a whole other episode just talking about that. But yeah, just when you're writing your documentation, clear scope, you know exactly what you're going for, you know why it's there, tell the story, help the reader, orientate the reader is something else I always say a lot of time, helps them see where it lives in the QMS. Keep your kappa specific. Don't go too off piste. Don't change a whole blooming change control process if maybe you just need a little bit more collaboration in some areas. Keep your audit specific. And yeah, making sure that you've got the appropriate approvers, and your training system isn't training everybody in your whole QMS. I think that pretty much summarizes our main points.
I agreed. I mean, but it's a principle that can be applied in any different category as well. So I would suggest that to our listeners at home, um, any situation that you're encountering at work, apply the principle or think about, how can I make this more simple, or how can I edit this back, to be more effective today and tomorrow and in 5 years' time.
Yeah, so you can then sort of pat yourself on the back and be like, oh yeah, well done, past Amy for doing that. Well done, past Susie.
That's great. Yes. She was really smart, that one.
She was really smart. I actually do that more often than I do admit. But it's always nice to give yourself a bit of a pat on the back, I think.
I always like when I'm uh, encountering a situation that apparently I had encountered before, but I don't remember, and I come up with the same answer. It's amazing.
It's like you're like, woohoo, high five yourself. Oh, love it. Great.
Well, this has been a nice, brief quality coffee break. Just time
Perfect.
for a cup of tea or coffee.
Nice. Yes, I will admit I forgot to make mine. I had a whole like nighttime tea situation that I was going to sort out in a big mug, which I didn't do. But yes, it would have been perfect. So I'll just pretend I've got my mug of tea.
Join us next time as we talk about preparing for an external audit or inspection.
As quality professionals, this is something that we can't get away from. So I'm sure it'll be an insightful discussion.
Yep, happens at least once a year, probably more often than that. But yeah, something that everybody has to go through and cut their teeth on eventually.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, Susie.
Bye.